The first thing I smelled wasn't the smoke. It was my own hair burning. I was staring at a legal document on my laptop while a man I'd never met tried to smash my skull into the monitor. 6 weeks ago, I was an engineer. Today, the government says I don't exist. My bank accounts are frozen, my apartment locks have been changed, and I have exactly 48 hours before a felony warrant turns me into a permanent ghost. My former partner didn't just steal my invention. He weaponized the entire legal system to erase me. Right now, a black SUV is idling at the end of the block, waiting for me to move. They don't want my tech anymore. They want the encrypted keycard sitting in my pocket. If I can't decode it before the sun comes up, I'm dead. If I do decode it, I have to walk straight into a trap. Let me take you back to where this began. The radiator hissed, spitting a metallic scent into the stale air of the studio. Marcus Reed hunched over his workstation, the blue glare of the monitor etching deep lines into his forehead. His fingers tapped a rhythmic, frantic staccato against the grease-stained keys. On the screen, the New Horizon Holdings firewall flickered, pulsed, and finally dissolved into a waterfall of shipping manifests. He wasn't just looking for numbers, he was looking for himself. Marcus counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3, as he scrolled through the logistics data. It was a habit born of a childhood spent in the dark, a way to ensure the floor was still beneath him. His eyes tracked the red-stamped entries marked for permanent deletion. There he was, or rather, there he wasn't. The digital scrub had been surgical. His social security number, his employment history at the very company he helped build, his patent filings for the Zenith core. All of it had been sucked out of the world's memory like air from a vacuum. His pulse thrummed against his throat, a dull ache mirroring the flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. They hadn't simply fired him. They had unmade him. The shipping manifests were the only thing they'd missed. Logistics were boring, handled by automated systems that didn't know a name from a serial number. Marcus watched as a specific shipment of heavy-duty cooling units moved from a warehouse in Oregon toward a destination that didn't officially exist. It was the trail he needed. He was a ghost, but ghosts could still follow the living. A sharp, rhythmic pounding at the door shattered the silence. Marcus stiffened, his hand hovering over the power switch. "It's open," he croaked, his voice cracking from hours of disuse. Sarah Johnson pushed inside, bringing the smell of damp Portland pavement and cheap espresso with her. She shook a translucent raincoat, droplets splattering the linoleum floor. Without a word, she reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a heavy, manila envelope. The paper crinkled as she slapped it onto the cluttered desk, pinning a stack of unpaid utility bills beneath it. "Ah, hard copies," Sarah said, her breath hitching slightly. She brushed a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear, her knuckles white as she gripped her bag strap. Ink and paper don't vanish when a server resets. I spent 3 hours in the archives of the county clerk's office. They still use filing cabinets from the 70s. No one thinks to delete those. Marcus reached for the envelope. The coarse texture of the paper grounded him. He pulled out a series of documents, contracts mostly, but one stood out. It was a signature page for a non-disclosure agreement, signed by a corporate attorney named Jennifer Martinez. "Did anyone follow you?" Marcus asked, his eyes never leaving the name. "The gray sedan stayed 2 blocks behind until the bridge," Sarah replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I took the service stairs. I counted them, Marcus. 54 steps, just like you told me." Marcus nodded, a small tension in his jaw relaxing. "Martinez is the key. She's the one who signed the erasure order. If she's involved, this goes all the way to the board." The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, charged with the static of an approaching storm. The smell of Sarah's wet coat mingled with the ozone of the overworked computer. They were close, and in this world, being close to the truth was the same as standing in the middle of a target. Before Marcus could respond, the silence of the hallway was obliterated. A heavy boot slammed into the door frame, the wood splintering with a sound like a gunshot. The door didn't just open, it disintegrated into the room. Two men flooded the space. They weren't police. They wore black tactical vests, their faces hidden behind matte black visors. One carried a taser that crackled with a vicious blue light, a sound like a hornet trapped in a jar. The other held a heavy baton. "Get down! Hands behind your head!" the first one barked. The smell of scorched air from the taser filled the small studio. Marcus didn't think. He reacted with the desperate precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. He grabbed his heavy desktop monitor, the plastic casing biting into his palms, and swung it with all his strength. It collided with the first attacker's chest, the screen shattering into 1,000 glass diamonds. The man grunted, his breath leaving him in a sharp huff as he stumbled back into the hallway. "Sarah, now!" Marcus yelled. Sarah didn't hesitate. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small canister. A cloud of orange pepper spray erupted, a sharp, stinging mist that caught the second man squarely in the visor. He shrieked, clawing at his face as the chemicals seeped into the vents of his mask. The air became a toxic soup of heat and stinging vapor. Marcus lunged forward. As the first man tried to regain his footing, a small, silver object fell from his tactical belt. It skittered across the linoleum, a rectangular piece of plastic that caught the light. Marcus dove for it, his fingers closing around the cold, hard edges of an encrypted keycard. "The fire escape!" Marcus shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm. They scrambled through the window, the metal of the fire escape groaning under their weight. 1, 2, 3, Marcus whispered as they descended the rain-slicked rungs. Behind them, the sounds of coughing and heavy boots echoed through the empty apartment. They hit the alleyway running, the violet glow of the Portland streetlights turning the rain into falling oil. They didn't stop until they reached a small, windowless basement room Sarah used for her equipment. The air smelled of dust and old film. Marcus sat at a workbench, his hands shaking as he placed the silver keycard under a magnifying lamp. "Let me see it," Sarah panted, her face flushed from the run. Marcus turned the card over. Embossed in the lower corner was a small, gold Scales of Justice logo. His heart skipped a beat. "This isn't from a security firm," he said, his voice a low growl. "Look at the seal. This belongs to Vance and Associates, Julian's own law firm." The realization hit like a physical blow. Julian Vance hadn't just hired muscle. He had turned the legal system into a hunting party. The people who were supposed to uphold the law were the ones carrying the tasers. "He's not just trying to hide the core," Sarah whispered, leaning over the table. "He's trying to bury the only person who knows how it works." Marcus pushed his glasses up his nose, his mind already racing through the next sequence of events. "We need to see what's on this card. If it's what I think it is, it's not just a key. It's a map. Subverted." The next morning, the world felt different. The light coming through the basement window was gray and sluggish. Marcus sat at a small laptop, his fingers hovering over the keys. He had a plan. He would use his remaining funds to hire a private courier to move the hard copies Sarah had found to a secure vault. He would then use his digital backups to trigger a leak to the press. It was a logical, multi-pronged approach. He had the evidence, he had the key card, and he still had a few $1,000s in a secondary account he'd kept hidden for years. "I'm going to transfer the retainer to the vault company now," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Once the physical files are locked away, we have leverage. Julian can't erase paper if he can't find it." He felt a surge of confidence. He was playing the game by the rules of logic. He logged into his secure portal, his eyes scanning the familiar interface. The numbers were there. $5,000. Enough to buy them a week of safety and a solid legal defense. He clicked transfer. A small green checkmark appeared on the screen. Transaction successful. Marcus let out a long, slow breath. His shoulders dropped an inch. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was back in control. He looked at Sarah and gave her a small, tight smile. "We're moving. The vault is confirmed." Sarah grabbed her bag. "I'll go meet the courier at the coffee shop on 5th. You stay here and start on the key card." "Be careful," Marcus said. He watched her leave, feeling a rare moment of victory. He had outmaneuvered the giant. He had protected the data. He sat back, his mind already calculating the next move. 1, 2, 3. The crisis was beginning to stabilize. He decided to check his primary accounts one last time, just to see if Julian had tried anything else. He refreshed the page. The screen didn't show his balance. Instead, a massive red banner stretched across the top of the browser. "Account frozen. Legal injunction." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. He clicked the notification. A PDF file opened. A high-priority restraining order and a defamation suit filed by New Horizon Holdings. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a total digital blockade. "No," Marcus whispered. He tried to access his secondary account, the one he had just used. Access denied. Assets seized by court order. The realization washed over him like ice water. The transaction successful message he'd seen seconds ago hadn't been a transfer to a vault. It had been a trap. By logging into his accounts, he had triggered a location ping embedded in the legal filing. Julian hadn't just frozen his money. He had used the legal system to bait Marcus into revealing his digital signature. The money wasn't just gone. It had been redirected to a court-appointed receiver, Jennifer Martinez. Every cent he had left to fight with was now in the hands of the woman who had erased him. He was now officially broke, but worse, he was now a person of interest in a cyber harassment investigation. The very act of trying to save himself had provided the evidence Julian needed to label him a criminal. He wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was a fugitive with a price on his head, and he just handed Julian the keys to his last hiding spot. The air in the basement suddenly felt thin. Marcus looked at the laptop, the red banner glowing like a heat lamp. He had tried to be smart, to follow the logic of the system, and the system had swallowed him whole. He needed to leave. Now. He grabbed his bag and headed back to his old apartment building, hoping against hope that he could recover a few more tools before the police arrived. He stayed in the shadows, his eyes darting to every passing car. When he reached the brick facade of his building, he felt a flicker of hope. The front door was still the same. He climbed the stairs, 1, 2, 3, until he reached the 4th floor. He reached for his keys, his hand trembling. He slid the key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. Marcus frowned, jiggling the handle. He looked closer. The brass of the lock was bright, new, and unscratched. The old, weathered deadbolt he'd installed himself was gone. In its place was a high-end electronic lock with a keypad. A small, white piece of paper was taped to the door. Notice of eviction and seizure of property. He stood there, paralyzed. Everything he owned, his clothes, his research notes, the photo of his father, was on the other side of that door, and he was now a trespasser in his own life. A low hum caught his attention. He looked over the railing to the street below. A black SUV was idling at the curb, its windows tinted so dark they looked like voids. It wasn't a police car. It was the same make and model as the vehicles the mercenaries had used. They weren't waiting for the law. They were waiting for him. Marcus backed away from the door, his heart racing. He couldn't go back to the basement. He couldn't stay here. He was being squeezed from both sides. The legal system on one and the hired muscle on the other. He ran for the roof. He knew the building's layout. He'd studied the blueprints when he moved in. He burst through the roof door, the cold Portland rain hitting him in the face. He scrambled across the gravel, heading for the adjacent parking garage. The garage was a concrete cavern, the air smelling of damp stone and exhaust. Marcus ducked behind a row of identical silver sedans. He needed to find Sarah. He needed a way out of the city. Suddenly, the screech of tires echoed through the garage. The black SUV burst through the entrance, its headlights cutting through the gloom like searchlights. It didn't slow down. It accelerated, the engine roaring as it headed straight for the row of cars where Marcus was hiding. Marcus lunged to his right, rolling across the concrete as the SUV slammed into the silver sedan he'd been crouching behind. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass was deafening. He scrambled to his feet, his lungs burning. The SUV reversed, its tires screaming as it realigned for another pass. There were no exits nearby, only the wide, open ramps where he'd be a sitting duck. He looked to his left, the elevator bank, but the SUV was already blocking the path. Then he saw it, the service hatch for the elevator shaft. It was a small, grimy door near the structural pillars. Marcus ran. He could hear the SUV behind him, the heavy thud of the engine getting closer. He reached the hatch, fumbled with the latch, and threw it open. Below him was a dark, vertical tomb of grease and steel. He didn't hesitate. He swung himself onto the ladder rungs, the cold metal biting into his palms. He slipped, his feet dangling over the 100-foot drop before he caught himself. Above him, the hatch slammed open. A man leaned through, the silhouette of a silenced pistol visible against the garage lights. Thwip. Thwip. 2 bullets sparked against the metal rungs just inches from Marcus's head. Marcus let go. He didn't fall. He gripped the thick, greasy cables and slid. The friction burned through his palms, the smell of scorched rubber filling his nose. He counted the floors as they blurred past. 1, 2, 3. He kicked out, hitting the emergency stop lever on the side of the shaft. The elevator car below him groaned to a halt. He scrambled onto the top of the car, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He found the manual override switch, his fingers dancing over the wires. He'd designed systems like this. He knew that if he crossed the primary intake with the secondary ground, the sensors would think there was a fire and automatically open the doors to the nearest floor. A spark erupted, and the lights in the shaft died. The doors slid open with a hiss. Marcus tumbled out into a secluded motel hallway on the outskirts of the city. He didn't look back. He ran until his legs felt like lead, eventually finding the small, neon-lit Dewdrop Inn, where Sarah had agreed to meet if everything went wrong. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Sarah was already there, pacing the threadbare carpet. When she saw him, covered in grease, his hands bleeding, she let out a sob of relief. "I saw the SUV," she whispered, pulling him inside. I thought they had you." "Not yet," Marcus said, his voice a rasp. He slumped onto the bed, pulling the silver keycard from his pocket. "But we're out of time. Julian isn't just following me anymore. He's hunting. He spent the next 6 hours hunched over a makeshift rig he'd built from a disassembled radio and an old tablet. The air in the room was stifling, the heat from the electronics making the sweat sting his eyes. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, watching him work. "The key card has a revolving code," Marcus explained, his fingers moving with surgical precision. "It changes every 60 seconds. If I can't sync the rig to the law firm's internal clock, we'll never get in." He bypassed the encryption by using a physical bridge, a small piece of copper wire he'd stripped from a lamp cord. He watched the screen of the tablet. Numbers scrolled past in a blur. Suddenly, the scrolling stopped. A map bloomed onto the screen. It wasn't a map of a law office. It was a blueprint for a facility in Northern Virginia. A windowless black monolith labeled Station 4. "It's a ghost server," Marcus whispered, his eyes widening. "Julian isn't just erasing data. He's moving it. Everything he stole from me, the original code, the test results, the proof of ownership, it's all there." Sarah leaned in. "Virginia? That's 3,000 miles away." "It's the only way, Sarah," Marcus said, looking her in the eye. "If we get that data, we don't just clear my name. We take the whole company down. But we have to go now, before the code rotates again." The flight to Virginia was a blur of recycled air and paranoia. They arrived at Dulles International Airport in the middle of a torrential downpour. The air smelled of jet fuel and damp earth. "I'll get the rental car," Sarah said as they stepped off the plane. "Meet me at the arrivals curb in 5 minutes." Marcus nodded, his hand tightening on the strap of his bag. He watched her walk away, her auburn hair a bright spark in the sea of gray suits. He stood by a pillar, counting the tiles on the floor. 1, 2, 3. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an unknown number. He answered it. "The terminal is very crowded this time of day, isn't it, Marcus?" The voice was smooth, syrupy, and instantly recognizable. Julian Vance. Marcus's blood turned to ice. "Where is she, Julian?" "Sarah is quite safe for the moment. She's in a very comfortable car. But I think she'd prefer to be with you. Tell me, Marcus, what is the price of a miracle? Is it worth the life of a friend?" Marcus looked toward the arrivals curb. The car Sarah had gone to fetch was there, but the driver's side door was open. Her camera bag was lying on the pavement, the strap torn. "You have 2 hours," Julian said, his voice dropping to a predatory whisper. "Bring the key card to Station 4. If you aren't there, or if you call the police, Sarah becomes another ghost in the machine. Imagine the headlines tomorrow, Marcus. Don't let her be a footnote." The line went dead. Marcus stood frozen, the roar of the airport terminal fading into a dull hum. He was alone in a city he didn't know, with no money, no allies, and a 2-hour deadline to save the only person who still believed in him. He needed help. He needed someone who knew the facility. He remembered a name from the shipping manifests, Robert Miller, an IT contractor who had been flagged for security irregularities just before Marcus was erased. If Miller was disgruntled, he might be the edge Marcus needed. He found Miller in a secluded park near the facility. The park was mathematically perfect, the grass cut to a uniform height, but it was eerily empty. Miller was a slouching man with a receding hairline, rubbing a crumpled sugar packet between his fingers. "I know why you're here," Miller said, his voice a weary sigh. "Vance is a monster. He's been using Station 4 to hide offshore accounts and stolen IP for years. I've been trying to get out, but he has his hooks in me. I need to get inside," Marcus said. "I have the key card, but I don't know the layout." Miller pulled out a tablet. Listen carefully. The thermal camera grid has a blind spot in the ventilation shafts on the north side. If you use this code, 4921, you can bypass the internal motion sensors in the vault. But you have to be fast. Once you're in, the air is kept at 45 degrees. The cold will slow you down. Marcus memorized the map, the lines and numbers etching themselves into his brain. Why are you helping me? Miller looked at the sugar packet, his thumb moving rhythmically against the paper. Scritch, scritch. Because I'm tired of being a puppet, Marcus. If only you knew what I've given up for this company. Just get the data, make it count. Marcus left the park, his mind a whirlwind of variables. He reached the facility, a black, windowless monolith that seemed to drain the light from the sky. He climbed into the ventilation shaft, the smell of dust and cold metal filling his lungs. He crawled through the narrow ducts, his knees scraping against the steel. 1, 2, 3, he whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached the vault, the heavy door sliding open with a hiss as he entered the bypass code. The air inside was freezing. It bit into his lungs, making every breath a sharp, painful effort. The room was filled with the low, bone-rattling hum of high-voltage electricity. Thousands of servers blinked with a rhythmic, blue light. Marcus ran to the central terminal. He jammed the keycard into the slot. Access granted. He began the recovery process, his fingers flying across the keys despite the numbness spreading through his hands. The progress bar moved with agonizing slowness. 10%. 20%. Suddenly, the lights in the vault flared to a blinding white. You always were a perfectionist, Marcus. Julian Vance stepped out from behind a server rack. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his cold, predatory eyes fixed on Marcus. Beside him were 3 armed guards. And in the center of the group, her hands bound and a bruise blooming on her cheek, was Sarah. Julian, Marcus rasped, his voice shaking from the cold. Tell me, Marcus, Julian said, leaning in. Did you really think it would be this easy? To walk into my house and take back what I've already sold? The guards lunged. Marcus tried to fight, swinging a heavy metal canister at the nearest man, but they were too fast. A baton slammed into his ribs, sending him sprawling across the glass floor. Another blow caught him in the jaw, and the world tilted. They pinned him to the floor, his face pressed against the freezing glass. He watched as Julian walked to the terminal and hit the cancel button on the data recovery. You're a visionary, Marcus, Julian said, his voice a syrupy drawl. But you're a terrible businessman. You don't understand that the truth is just another commodity. The door to the vault opened again. Robert Miller walked in, his slouch gone, his expression cold. He wasn't rubbing the sugar packet anymore. Did he follow the map, Robert? Julian asked. Every step, Miller replied, his voice devoid of the weariness he'd shown in the park. The ventilation bypass, the sensor codes. He walked right into the kill box. Marcus stared at Miller, the betrayal hitting harder than the baton. You worked for him? He didn't just work for me, Marcus. Julian laughed. He designed the trap. We needed you to break in. We needed the disgruntled former employee to attempt a high-stakes sabotage of a national infrastructure site. The police are already on their way. By the time they get here, the servers will be wiped, and you'll be the domestic terrorist who tried to shut down the grid. Julian pulled a pair of heavy zip ties from his pocket and cinched Marcus's hands behind his back. The plastic bit into his wrists, cutting off the circulation. And the best part? Julian whispered. Leaning down so close, Marcus could smell his expensive cologne. I've rigged the cooling system. In 10 minutes, this room will hit 150 degrees, an accidental electrical fire. The evidence dies, you die, and I become the hero who tried to save the company from a madman. Julian turned to the guards. Take the girl. We have a press conference to prepare for. They dragged Sarah out of the room, her screams muffled by a heavy hand over her mouth. The vault door hissed shut, the heavy bolts sliding into place with a sound of finality. Marcus was alone. The hum of the servers began to change, the pitch rising as the cooling fans slowed to a halt. The air was already beginning to shimmer with heat. He looked at the terminal. The progress bar was gone, replaced by a massive red "Wipe in Progress" message. He slumped against the server rack, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had lost. He had tried to be the smartest man in the room, and he had been outplayed by a man who didn't care about the rules. But as the heat began to bake the air, Marcus felt something in his pocket. A small, sharp piece of copper wire he'd used to bypass the keycard. He wasn't just a coder. He was an engineer. And he knew that every system had a flaw. He twisted his hands, the zip ties slicing into his skin, until he could reach the wire. He fumbled with it, his fingers numb and shaking, until he found the seam in the environmental control panel on the side of the server rack. He jammed the wire into the sensor. A spark erupted, and the lights died. The system shrieked. A computerized voice filled the room. Critical overheat detected, initiating halon gas release. A thick, white cloud of gas hissed from the ceiling vents. It was freezing, a sudden, violent contrast to the heat. The vault door's emergency release triggered, the magnets losing power as the system prioritized fire suppression. Marcus didn't wait. He used a jagged piece of a broken server casing to saw through the zip ties, the plastic snapping with a sharp pop. He scrambled to the terminal, his lungs burning from the gas. He didn't try to recover the data. He knew Julian was watching the wipe. Instead, he accessed the Aegis filter, the very code he had written. He knew the back door he'd built into the kernel, a small, hidden sequence of numbers that even Julian hadn't found. 1, 2, 3. He whispered. He typed the code. The wipe stopped, but he didn't stop there. He opened a direct link to Sarah's news blog, the one she'd kept active on a secondary server. He didn't just upload the files, he triggered a live broadcast of the vault's internal security feed, which was still recording. Tell me, Marcus. Julian's voice echoed through the speakers. The recording of the confession he'd just made. What is the price of a miracle? The upload hit 100%. The world was watching. Marcus stumbled out of the vault, the halon gas stinging his eyes. He found Sarah in the hallway, the guards distracted by the alarms and the sudden influx of police officers who had arrived not to arrest a terrorist, but to investigate a massive public data breach. The FBI swarmed the building, their jackets a sea of yellow letters. Marcus watched as Julian Vance was led out in handcuffs, his impeccably tailored suit rumpled, his cold eyes finally filled with something like fear. Jennifer Martinez followed, her silver hair disheveled, her mouth hanging open in silent shock. Marcus stood in the rain outside the facility, the air smelling of ozone and wet pavement. Sarah was beside him, her hand gripping his. "You did it," she whispered. "No," Marcus said, looking at the black monolith. "We did it." A week later, Marcus sat in a quiet park in Portland. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the grass. He held a small, leather-bound notebook, the one Sarah used to log her apologies. "You're not on here today," Marcus said, handing it back to her. Sarah smiled, a real, warm smile that reached her eyes. I think I'm done with that. What about you? The company's gone? The patent is yours again? You could be a billionaire by Monday. Marcus looked at the kids playing near the fountain. He thought about his father, about the fire, and about the years he'd spent hiding in the dark, counting the steps. I'm releasing it, he said. The patent? To the public domain. The Zenith Core belongs to the world, Sarah, not to a board of directors. If I own the proof, I own my life. I don't need to own the money. He stood up, stretching his legs. He didn't feel like a ghost anymore. He felt visible. He felt real. He walked toward the street, Sarah by his side. He didn't count the steps. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where he was. The sun dipped below the horizon, and for the first time in his life, Marcus Reed wasn't afraid of the dark.